probably 90% of what's leaked is politically motivated.
Oh,
It's
wow.
it's an artificial leak. It's somebody speaking off the books who wants to drive some sort of political agenda. And then only 10% of what you see is truly just a bystander who's trying to do the right thing, a whistleblower who just wants the information to be known, right? The majority of it is some diplomat or some politician or some military officer or some person of influence who's speaking off the record because they want the information to be released because it is either intentional disinformation or it's information that drives an agenda that's in benefit of that politician.
That's crazy. Like it's so
People don't
hard now to understand what to believe.
people don't realize it. Yeah. The thing is, imagine how like even we were talking earlier about your phone. Your WhatsApp it's end-to-end encrypted. Nobody is going to find out what you're talking about on WhatsApp unless they specifically target your phone or they target the phone of the person you're talking to. That's the only way that they can get the encryption key for your message. So the only way that that information that you're talking about gets shared is if you or the other person chooses to share the information. Now, sometimes there's a mistake, like what happened in the United States when Hegseth sent a message to the journalist, right? So there's mistakes that happen, and that's part of the 10% where hey, there's a leak, and nobody has an agenda. It's just a leak. But the majority of the time, you're choosing which message from all of the messages that you had with your partner. Which message am I going to share? And which message are they going to share? And who are we going to share it with? And will we say it's from us or will we say that it's an anonymous source? It's all an information and warfare power play.
Yeah. The information warfare that we face is mind-boggling. It's also mind-boggling and it's pretty scary is how easily we're influenced. Just remember, a week ago, there was all the news was talking about was about Trump and Elon having that beef. Now, remember, I literally went to interview President Milei because they were talking about the bill, spending bill, and Elon's concern was about America's debt. So I interviewed President Milei about that. As we're editing the interview, I landed back here in Dubai, and then the war breaks out. I'm like, wow, everyone forgot about that. And you mentioned Hexas and the leak. That was everything everyone was talking about, and that was the most important thing in the news. People have just moved on. And there's, I think, something between the Trump-Elon thing and there's a protest in LA that no one's talking about anymore, the ICE protest, which goes to the next question. Something you talk a lot about is how effective and how common is information warfare? Like, what are we being exposed to on a daily basis that counts as information warfare?
So to understand information warfare, you have to kind of think like the national security apparatus. You've got all these different types of warfare. There's intelligence warfare, there's information warfare, there's cyber warfare, there's traditional warfare, and then put them all on a scale of how much they cost, like actual dollars and cents. Traditional conflict is very, very expensive. Intelligence conflict is not as expensive, but still very expensive. Cyber conflict is cheaper than either of the other two. Information warfare is the cheapest type of warfare. It means that with any budget, you can maximize your impact with information warfare. And then information warfare is also beneficial because you don't have to direct 100% of it. All you have to do is direct a small amount, and then that small amount, like a pebble in a pond, it has a ripple effect. And you drop one story, and everybody else picks up the story. And then they add their own slant and their own bias, and there's a game we play in elementary school here in the United States called Telephone, where 5 people sit in a row, 5 children sit in a row. One child tells one child next to him a story or a word, and then you watch as the story changes before it gets to the 5th person. That's all the benefit of information warfare. So in the world that we live in, Mario, I speak one language fluently. I speak English fluently. Everything else that I speak has mixed fluency. How many languages do you speak fluently?
2, English and French.
English and French. So that means you and I are highly susceptible to whatever media comes out in our native languages. But we don't even know what the media is in Arabic or Portuguese or Spanish or Chinese. So there can literally be the same story presented in completely different formats, but in different languages. So the information warfare landscape that you and I understand is only the information warfare landscape of our native languages. There's more information being spread in every other language across the land. And the people originating those messages are the people who understand that they're only going to be interpreted by people who speak that native language. So anytime a story comes out in English, that story is cultivated only for native English speakers, not anybody else. And anytime a story comes out in Mandarin, it's cultivated only for native Mandarin speakers, not anybody else. So one of the big benefits of AI that I'm looking forward to is AI is going to be able to immediately translate all the information from all the different languages and isolate it into your native language. So that has pros and cons in the information landscape, but it is something that I'm looking forward to because there's less opportunity now for me to be forced to only listen to English-speaking media.
Yeah, I think that kind of goes into how USAID and other NGOs were able to have so much influence around the world, is that they did not have like one major outlet that they leveraged to be able to influence the thinking across different countries, but they invested in local journalists or local media outlets, and they would just be donating money to all these or investing money or paying all these different journalists, having a program that allows them to infiltrate that country by having journalists or media outlets on the ground. And Ukraine is the most obvious example. There's been many others that were reported in the leaks, to disseminate information based on a certain narrative, which goes to your point that each language has their own information warfare going on, which is crazy. Like I just imagine massive offices and intelligence officer, the CIA, for example, that has to disseminate all that information, all these different languages.
Well, it's not necessarily, you'd be surprised. It's not a large office because in information warfare, you've got two terms that you have to keep in mind. You have messaging and narrative. I've been talking about messaging, but when you were responding to my comment, you talked about narrative. They're not the same thing, right? Messaging has to do with what is the statement or the story that you're making that has an emotional appeal to it. It has to have an emotional appeal, right? Children are dying in Gaza. Mothers are watching their sons and husbands get killed in Ukraine. Like these are emotional things. So you send out an emotional message when you're creating an information warfare piece. But then what happens is everybody else who hears that piece picks it up. They have an emotional reaction to it, and then they create a logical story out of it. They create a narrative, and then that narrative spreads. When you control the messaging, it's very hard to control the narrative. So what that means is information warfare is very inexpensive because you only need a few people to create messages, and then those messages spread, and the narratives go into whatever direction they're going to go into, which is why you have some narratives that are pro-Gaza, and so some narratives that are pro-Palestine, and some narratives that are anti-Israel, and some narratives that say that if you support Palestine, then you support Hamas. Like the narratives are hard to control.
Yeah, that's been very fascinating. And this is where, is that part of information warfare? So there's been 2 points that have been really fascinating to me. It's like anyone that supports Gaza, immediately they put them in the basket, they support Hamas. But they're completely different things. And then the same thing with Israel. It's like everyone that's critical of Israel as a country, they're attacking Jews or they're anti-Semite, which is also fascinating. And I know you've talked about this as well, which is why I'm bringing it up. Is that part of the information warfare? And if it is, it's been extremely successful because I've never seen a country where the country like Iran, no one has mixed Iran with Shiites. Iran is Iran, Shiites are Shiites. But with Israel, everyone's, not everyone, but people are a lot, are being criticized whenever they criticize Israel. They're like, hey, why are you attacking Jews? And I've seen this, I won't mention the name, a very high profile interviewer that I heavily respect was interviewing a Palestinian. So they're pretty critical of Israel, just to be respectful of them. They've been in the middle, but they were also interviewing a Palestinian official. And when the official was criticizing Israel, they're like, so you must hate Jews. He's like, no. I love Jews. I don't mind Jews. But I just think Israel's strategy here against Gaza has just been very brutal and we should be criticizing it, blah, blah, blah. He's like, yeah, but most of Israelis are Jews. So if you're criticizing Israel, you're obviously criticizing Jews. What percentage of Israelis are Jews? So it's like he couldn't see, and someone's very smart. It's like he couldn't see that line between them. Is that part of information warfare, or is it just humans being humans?
It's both. Information warfare is so effective because humans are predictable, because humans will be humans. So I already know that if I talk about children to a parent, that person will respond differently to my message than if I speak about children to somebody who's not a parent. So I can make one message that I already know is going to have a different level of response in one community than in a different community. But it will make an impact in both communities with one message. So that's what's so powerful about it. There's another concept in information warfare called the signal and the noise. The signal and the noise. The noise is all the different opinions, all the different positions, all the different chatter that come about secondary to the message that's been transmitted. The signal is the message that's been transmitted. So it's very difficult for FBI, Shin Bet, for counter spies, for people who are trying to prevent information warfare. It's very difficult for them to isolate the signal because there's so much noise. You saw this during the elections in 2020, the elections in 2016 here in the United States. You saw the FBI and NSA and the Counterintelligence Center come out and say, hey, foreign countries are going to try to influence our election, and they're going to do it on social media. So everybody beware. That's all they could do, because it was so hard for them to isolate which account was a real person, which account was a bot, which account was actually a feeder for repeating or engagement of another fake account just to get traction. So it's very difficult to reverse engineer information warfare without the benefit of AI. And one of the things that AI will most likely be heavily involved in the future is trying to find the signal in the noise.
But also able to generate a lot of noise as well.
Generate more signals and more noise. Exactly right.
So right now, it's humans trying to spot which humans are trying to create some noise. In the future, it's going to be AI, so agents kind of spotting other agents that are creating noise. It's a fascinating world. And it's just fascinating to see how the warfare is just changing. The drones are a great example of that, what we saw in Russia, what we saw in Iran. Just on a kind of final few points on the Iran war, which is obviously ongoing right now. And that's the risk of radiation leak. We talked about it earlier off camera. And the risk, and you mentioned it briefly, of Iran having a nuclear weapon. Or someone I interviewed said there's a risk, and for me, I still struggle to believe that to be a genuine risk of Israel using a nuclear weapon, which I think is, in my mind, is completely off the table. But I'd love to get your thoughts on these 3 points. So a radiation leak and the risks of that. As someone lives in Dubai, which is close by to Iran, it's a concern. Number 2 is a nuclear attack by Iran, and they might have a nuclear weapon through a briefcase, something, or what do you call it, a dirty bomb, for example. And the third one is a potential nuclear attack by Israel.
So in my experience, in the U.S. military nuclear service, as well as the U.S. CIA, in my experience, nobody wants to use a nuclear weapon. Nobody wants to use a nuclear weapon because it's so devastating in so many ways. It's economically devastating. It destroys life. It destroys infrastructure. It destroys land. And then it has secondary impact on neighboring countries. It has secondary impact on non-nuclear targets with a change in the wind, right? So the traditional large-scale nuclear weapon, nobody wants to see those be used. Everybody wants to use them as a deterrent. A deterrent means, hey, I have a nuke, so don't mess with me. I have a nuke, so obey my boundaries, right? Obey my statements. That said, we have watched as the threat of nuclear deterrence has become less impactful over time, right? Ukraine invaded into Russia. No nuclear response. Israel has bombed nuclear facilities inside Iran. You've seen conflict all over the world where there has not been nuclear escalation of the kind that we saw during the Cuban Missile Crisis. So the question becomes whether or not we're actually getting closer to the use of a nuclear weapon, specifically because people want to send a message saying, remember, nuclear weapons are devastating. So why do I say that? I say that because I think Israel has less of an appetite to use a nuke than Iran. Israel doesn't want to be the country that sends a nuke into Iran. They don't want the world to think that they're not strong enough to handle it conventionally. They don't want to destroy Iranian infrastructure, because if they destroy Iranian infrastructure, when they commit their regime change, that the first thing that regime is going to have to do is clean up a nuclear fallout site. So Israel does not have an appetite for using a nuclear weapon. But Iran understands that it may only have one option left. The only option it has left may be a small tactical nuclear warhead delivered by a truck into some other country, into Israel or into a pro-Israeli state. We don't even know. But Iran understands that if it has a nuclear warhead, and a warhead capability is very different than a delivery vehicle capability. And a delivery vehicle capability is different than the success of that delivery vehicle going into the actual target. This is what we're watching with North Korea all the time, right? North Korea continues to have these failed delivery vehicles, missiles that fall out of the sky or rockets that go off trajectory or whatever. So if Iran doesn't have a warhead, or if they haven't developed their own warhead, but they have someone else's warhead, say a Russian warhead that was given to them, we don't know. And what they do with that warhead is going to be critically important, because if Iran uses a nuke, the world is going to wake up to, oh shit, we shouldn't mess with people that have nukes. But if Israel uses a nuke, then the whole world's going to turn on Israel and say, why would you nuke a country that's poorer and weaker, and you already have military dominance? So it's a question of how it works.
Are you worried as well of a radiation leak, or?
I'm less worried about a radiation leak in terms of nuclear weapons, because nuclear weapons are solid state. They're a solid state version of uranium or plutonium. So it's not like when a nuclear reactor has a meltdown, then you have to worry about a leak. I lived in Abu Dhabi, Mario, in 2018, 2019. And my primary concern in Abu Dhabi was that Iran would target Abu Dhabi rather than target Israel, because Abu Dhabi is pro-Western. Abu Dhabi has a lot of military infrastructure down there that's Emirati owned and Emirati based. And in 2018, 2019, there were still tensions, some growing tensions between Iran and UAE. I don't know what those tensions look like today, but it would be easier for Iran to smuggle something into Abu Dhabi or the UAE than to smuggle something into Israel. But it would still send the same message, right?
Yeah, because then you've pressured the US by striking a US ally, impacting the global economy, but not attacking the US, so the US does not need to get involved, and that changes the whole geopolitical landscape. So that could be just a
correct. And imagine if it wasn't IRGC that delivered the weapon, it was Hamas that delivered the weapon, or Hezbollah that delivered the weapon. Now Iran can even say it wasn't us. So
plausible deniability. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, so thank you. I'm leaving Dubai. I'm going back to my home country in Australia, far away from all this. Last question, Andrew, is where do you see the world, not the world, where do you see the Middle East and Iran in the next, let's say, 12, let's stick to 12 months for now?
It's a very difficult thing to predict, right? I think that we will continue to see reduced support for Israel. That's almost a guarantee. I don't think that Bahrain or Saudi or Oman or UAE, I don't think they're going to verbalize support for Israel anytime soon. I think they're going to continue to have a very vocal stance against Israel, no matter how much success Israel has in Iran. They're going to continue to publicly denounce Israeli activity against the Palestinians, because, like you said, that truly is the primary humanitarian issue on the table, right? Is the potential, still undetermined genocide of Palestinians in Gaza at the hand of a supreme military power. So whatever happens in Iran is not going to take the world's attention off of what Israel's doing to the Palestinian people. So I don't see that changing in the next 12 months. I also don't necessarily see Iran collapsing in the next 12 months. I can see Iran being exposed to continued warfare and continued conflict, but I don't know that we're going to see the Ayatollah disappear in the next 12 months. Even if he's killed, a new Ayatollah, a new theocracy will most likely come back. I'm really curious, actually, Mario, if in the next 3 to 6 months, what we actually see is the world try to defend Iran. That's what I'm the most curious to see. Because if public sentiment against Israel stays the way it is, then you would arguably start to see protests around the world for them to stop beating up Iran, right? You would see it in Europe. You could even potentially see it here in the United States. And this whole No Kings movement, the No Kings movement is primarily focused in the United States on the idea of Donald Trump being a king of the United States, but it's really a movement against authoritarian leaders everywhere. So Netanyahu is showing himself to be an authoritarian leader, just like Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin. These are individuals who are authoritarian in nature, not individuals who are democratic in nature. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens as democracy across Europe is kind of shifting and democracy in the United States is shifting. Could we actually see a world where 6 months from now, public sentiment is pro-Iran?
It's like we're having a war of sentiment today, global war of sentiment.
It's true.
Andrew, really appreciate your time to come in under those circumstances and discuss the war. It's a pleasure to meet you, and I'm sure we'll speak again. I appreciate your time, man.